Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them and how you can build it yourself.
This episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast is brought to you by our sales coaching and consulting services. Are you looking to create repeatable, scalable, and predictable revenue? We've helped thousands of companies grow their business with tailored expert advice backed by testing to ensure they establish the best practices that'll work for them. Head over to bit.ly/predictable revenue coaching to learn more. Digital transformation is a fate that no department in B2B companies can escape. I mean, even in B2C companies for that matter, this modernization is happening. But one arm of the revenue generating organization seems to be resistant to that change, possibly to its detriment. I'm your host, Sarah Hicks, and today on the Predictable Revenue Podcast, I'm going to be chatting with an expert about why sales is lagging behind in digital transformation and how to fix it. He is a chief operating officer at people.ai. He's a compelling and passionate speaker with global experience leading sales, services, and operations teams through the challenges of scale and strategic change. He establishes and alters organizational momentum for the purpose of building results-oriented, high-performing sales, services, and operations teams. Art Harding, welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Sarah. As you know, I'm always excited to talk about this topic.
Oh, yeah. Cool. Well,
thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. I'm excited to dive in. To start us off, give us some context. What do we mean by sales lagging here?
Yeah, so I think we've all been, if you're in the B2B tech industry, we've been selling, if not preaching, digital transformation since we first saw Netflix and Uber change the way we travel or consume content. And I think maybe even with a little bit of a smug attitude that we were in an inside joke as we were transforming all of these economies and, whether it was the building out of the cloud or subscription revenues and, felt really empowered that we were changing the economy and changing the world. And as part of my journey, I'm currently responsible for our sales, services, and marketing functions at People.ai, but I also still maintain responsibility for our operating functions as well. My background starting in the field, selling, serving customers, and then more recently working in operations really brought home to me that as we started to see what is now being called RevOps or the operating functions, it's each of the go-to-market functions rely so heavily on to do their job, that the marketing ops, sales ops, services ops, channel operations were really on the front edge of this transformation. And as I dug into as an operator, how do all these parts work together? My big aha moment was, ironically enough, not in terms of trying to drive go-to-market strategies for the companies I was working for, but it was as starting to become a buyer. I started to purchase technology and experience the buyer and customer journey, that it's so easy in a meeting planning how many BDRs you need or what your sales methodology is going to be, or whether you're going to start engaging with a customer on a renewal 90, 180 days, or when you cut the PO, that we may have lost sight that our North Star for this transformation is not within our marketing, sales, or services side. The North Star is actually the buyer and customer journey. And it became increasingly more difficult for me to have a conversation about the buyer and customer journey with any one department without identifying everything from business process dependencies to leading and lagging indicators. And it brought me to this awareness that's now turned into a belief that go-to-market, and when I say go-to-market, I mean marketing, sales, and services, is not digitally transforming. It's some instances transformed. And I'll make a joke. If I was giving out Olympics at the digital medals at the Digital Transformation Olympics, I think marketing would be up, getting a gold medal with the emergence of SaaS. And if you think about marketing 10 or 15 years ago, how big do you want your booth? Do you like the brand? What event or sporting event or dinner did we plan? Now we know marketing is a data-driven, automation-heavy practice that knows as much about our personas that we're targeting and buying centers as anyone in the organization. Maybe competing for that gold medal on the platform right beside them and with silver, arguably maybe gold in some organizations, is your customer success department. And I think of hallmarks of digital transformation or modernization being the naming of new functions, the creation of new responsibilities, the demand gen team in marketing, or post-sales, what used to be called professional services, with people doing time and materials, fixed price, We'd invite people to come to our headquarters to take 4-day classes with hands-on labs, or we'd bring the training to you. But now if you look at post-sales, it's no longer called professional services. They've rebranded, renamed their responsibility to customer success. Education, maybe there's people still doing 4 or 5-day on-site hands-on classes, but the expectation now is that the education is in snackable, bite-sized moments, ideally embedded in the product right when and where you need it. And most people expect that to be embedded in the subscription of whatever it is they're purchasing. So we can see that marketing has transformed into this very data-driven, digital-heavy organization with this intrinsic, connection with its operating team. Post-sales has been studying the customer journey and moments for upsell and cross-sell. And that brings us to, and prior to the last years, I think it was even more pronounced, but this, laggard, which I'm not even sure we're on the medal podium yet in the sales function. And if we were, I think it would be some of our younger athletes in this digital transformation Olympics, in that sales has been digitally transforming from the bottom up or inside out. And what I mean by that is BDRs and SDRs or inside sales reps are growing up in these digital cockpits with tools that, as an ex-enterprise seller from over a decade ago, I couldn't even imagine having this type of telemetry insight. But a lot of the leaders today have grown up not in this digital world, properly prioritizing relationship building, great discovery, curiosity, and relationship building with your customers. And I think as we unpack the rest of this conversation, I'd be remiss if people think that technology is going to supplant or replace people. I think we're thinking about it the wrong way. We've seen trend after trend, personally and professionally, where we suspect technology is somehow going to replace people, when in fact, it really augments us and unleashes our potential. But we've got this really interesting friction today that was just enhanced by the macro events of the last 2 years, where suddenly the line that enterprise meant you were in the field and you built relationships and you were physically close to your customer, and inside sellers were remote and somehow sold lower dollar values on simpler use cases. That's all being challenged. And we absorbed so much of this go-to-market tech as an industry. And now as leaders, particularly those of us that may not have grown up with personal or professional comfort with these data-driven cockpits or these suggested next steps, it's time for us to get more curious, because I do think in the future, the organizations where the CMO and the CRO and the CCO work together and understand that this technology journey or this modernization should not happen at different paces across the different orgs, that it actually has to happen together. That some of our best pipeline is actually going to come from our customer success teams cross-selling and upselling into the install base. So that's where I think we're at today. Is it's happening, it's here. It's unnerving in some areas, it's exciting in others, but I don't think there's any hiding from it. And I think the time is now for enterprise sellers to really ask what this means for the profession formerly known as enterprise sales.
So, I mean, you mentioned that sales is kind of lagging behind, but that marketing and customer success have managed to kind of keep up with the transformation. They've watched the changes in the customer journey and the way that people like to buy, and they've managed to adapt very quickly. Like, I would argue that those kind of the older generation of marketers, they were around at the same time as this generation of sellers that's not managing to keep up. So why is sales as a function not adopting technology at the pace that the other functions are?
I think, part of it stems from, and one of the things I want to be cautious of is, while marketing and customer success may be ahead, I actually think they're in the next chapter, which is they're trying to evolve. Do they have the right skill sets? If you look at the skill sets within a marketing organization or a customer success organization, the profiles of the people that are being hired and developed in those departments look different than they were 5-10 years ago. I believe the reason marketing went first is it happened to coincide with the real explosion of SaaS and cloud-based solutions. And I'm going to use the word the displacement of the CIO, particularly in the B2B tech space. And I think it's important that we distinguish some of this narrative is very, very accurate for enterprise B2B tech companies. But if you go outside of the technology space, you start getting into life sciences, manufacturing, other verticals, you're going to see a very different maturity curve in terms of the adoption of these practices that we're talking about. But as the SaaS industry really took off, there was billions and billions of dollars that were invested in helping these early stage fledgling SaaS companies, which at one time even Salesforce was a very, very small, SaaS-based company. So all of this investment and all of this energy went into the top of funnel to create these companies. Mm-hmm. And if you looked at your capabilities today and you started using stick-it notes to inventory your capabilities from lead routing to, ABM, persona insights, or targeting accounts, you might find your company has a very sophisticated suite of top of funnel ability because you're a company trying to grow. And what's interesting is as a company shifts from that top of funnel obsession of just adding new customers to starting to look at how do you expand, cross-sell, and upsell, those capabilities start to bleed throughout the rest of the go-to-market org. So if we look back over the last 10 plus years, there's been so much investment in so many great companies created to optimize the top of funnel. I think the marketers got dragged there, but also the marketers were working with much smaller teams. They were not necessarily distributed physically around the world close to where their customers were. So the CMO, along with MOPS, could get in a room and say, we need to be smarter and better about doing this. Look at all the investment going on in our space. As the company's getting larger, the CFO is asking us to be more efficient with our marketing spend. And they kind of got pushed first. And also the investment was there. Now seeing as the SaaS industry is growing up, and for those of us that have been in a SaaS business model, we all know incremental ARR is just the water on the top of the iceberg, but that install base sinks below the water. And it's not long before your CCO is probably carrying a bigger revenue number than your CRO, depending on the reporting structures. So CS is really optimizing the post-sales, the customer journey. And sales, I think partly because it was a little mysterious what exactly sellers were doing. There was this almost implicit privacy that if you were an enterprise seller, we couldn't possibly understand what it is you were doing from Monday morning to Friday afternoon. And you hear a lot that sales is one part art and one part science. I think most digital transformation is taking things that either had middlemen, disinformation, or something that we called artistic. But when you really start to unpack it, it becomes more of a system, a set of processes, steps, but we can still perform it artistically. And this is where I think actually the people, and forgive the pun with people AI, we believe that as technology is taking off, the people are actually going to become more important than ever before. We may just have new titles, we may have new roles and responsibilities, and we may be required to understand things that historically we weren't required to internalize. And I think that's the challenge, that if you've been successful selling for a few decades and you haven't had to use this stuff, you may fall into that cliche that we've seen every time some form of a revolution or modernization, someone who says, I never needed a Model T before. My horse always got me from point A to B. I've been traveling between this city and that city for a long time. Why now? And I really think for us to merge the best of what we're seeing from, in our younger generation of sellers or early on in their career, it's on us as the more seasoned leaders to get curious again and start asking some hard questions about maybe some sacred cows or things we've taken for granted.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's why sales is potentially behind. You mentioned a little bit earlier the future of sales and kind of assured us that technology is not going to replace the person. It's going to augment, it's going to enhance the person. That person is going to become more important than ever. So what do you see in the future of sales and sales technology and where that digital transformation can take us?
Yeah, so it's always dangerous to communicate in broad brushstrokes, but I know that a lot of the folks that I've worked with in sales over the years, we share a number of things in common. Not many of us necessarily set out with a major in sales in college and said, when I grow up, I'm going to become an enterprise sales professional. We may have ended up in the profession. Maybe it's because we were comfortable being curious. Maybe it's because we were comfortable building relationships. But there's some cliches that hold true, right? Maybe we weren't the best at managing time. Maybe we weren't the best at being systems thinkers. Maybe we weren't the best at setting priorities. And if we think about the role that technology can help that seller who, for those who haven't carried a bag, it may not be obvious. You don't necessarily always feel like you work for the company. Sometimes you can feel a little bit like a hired mercenary with a slot in your back, which, they put a quarter in and you perform a task. But if you don't, then you're not on the team anymore. Whereas, customer success and marketing teams really feel part of the company. It's easy to feel alone as an enterprise seller out there in the world, in your city, local by yourself, having to go perform this task. So in the technology is not at a point where it's going to do a sales call for us, especially we're talking about B2B enterprise selling with complicated buying centers, multiple solutions. But maybe the technology can help us prioritize better. Maybe the technology can move our managers out of, if you're in a leadership position today, I would take an inventory. Do you view your role as instructing on governance and outcomes? Like, are you a governance manager where you're telling people the why and the how and trying to hold people compliant to a certain way and then just evaluating the outcome? You either got the job done or you didn't. I think the days of that are already gone. And if you're still leading and managing that way, the technology is in place to really help bring maybe one of the things that we all craved as sellers, which is a little bit of discipline, to send some signals into where should we be spending our time? Which accounts have we forgotten to call upon? And, sounds like a crazy word that you may have forgotten to call on an account, but you're engaged with this opportunity right here. It's starting to close. You're pulling all the forces together, and all of a sudden you forget about that next quarter opportunity. Technology can now remind you that you've got next quarter is going to be here as well. Here are the people that you may or should be meeting with. And what I have found is the best sellers instinctively were always looking to not only compare themselves to their peers and understand what their peers were doing better, but they also wanted to sell with teams. They wanted lots of people selling on their behalf. And so more and more, I think the seller of the future is going to be orchestrating and coordinating and sending digital signals, not just to their SE or to their sales manager, but receiving signals from customer success, receiving intent signals from marketing, knowing how often their executive sponsor has engaged with an account and being able to change the music to go execute on that. So it's going to be, hopefully we get to exercise the parts of the role that we love even more, but it comes with the responsibility of getting curious about the roles that the different disciplines play with us, being open to taking these signals, not trying to do it alone, and recognizing that your prospects and customers are getting served by teams of people at your competitors. And if you're trying to do this alone, you're doing it the hard way. So that's where.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, well, let's get tactical. You mentioned a couple of times that leaders need to take stock of where they are, make sure that they're not kind of hanging on, as you mentioned, to these sacred cows, these old ways that are potentially not serving us. So how can a sales leader audit their current sales process to understand where they are and what they're missing?
Sure. So I'd be remiss if I didn't say, I think part of, as we ended that conversation, the first thing you should take stock of is, I think of a power triangle in every go-to-market org where strategy gets translated into execution, and there's 3 points to that triangle. The first one is your operations team, and the second one is your enablement team. And everyone nods their head vigorously in terms of what they want from those two teams. But in fact, if it's a partnership, what I would turn around to the revenue leaders or the frontline leaders in particular is, what is it that you're willing to give? Because if this is a partnership, those three functions, the frontline leader, your operations team, and your enablement team, actually need to work together. So if I was auditing myself as a sales or marketing or services leader today, I would start with, what is my relationship with my operating function? Does it report to me? Is it centralized? Do I know what they do? Do I know their capacity constraints? Do I know how they prioritize what they deliver for us? What language do I use to communicate with them? And more importantly, are you advocating investment in these functions? Because as we think about where this is going, if you have this out-of-body relationship with your operating or enablement function, like it's some form of a deli counter that you just walk up and place an order and say, hey, I need lead routing, or I need account planning, or make it so. I can tell you in the space of revenue operations or enablement, it's a tough profession. It's impossible without having an informed, curious leader that respects operations and enablement. Some of the best leaders I've worked with were just as interested in how operations worked and how enablement played a role as they were the performance of their business, and they recognized this integration. The most challenging relationships for operators and enablement folks is when someone treats them like a deli counter, that they just throw orders over their head and wait for their sandwich. That's, to me, the first signal that you may not be ready for what's coming, is having a sincere curiosity about your role in setting a culture of operational rigor and readiness, and your role in setting a culture of learning around enablement. Now, let's take it home into I'm managing a sales team. I've got a cadence. I actually just went through this process internally with my team. We inventoried all of the meetings and cadence and that were going across the organization. And we asked a couple of questions. Not only do we ask what the inputs were for each one of these cadence items and what needed to happen during it with the output, but we also ask, were these lagging or leading indicators? And so were these moments of inspection, whether it's our sales and marketing interlock or the weekly forecast call, account planning or QBRs, were these structured to look back at something that had happened in the past where we would go through this heroic accumulation of data to review it retrospectively and make some recommendations on the quarter we're probably already 3 to 4 weeks in? Or were these cadences that were more real time, where we were able to offer coaching to our teams before an outcome occurred? And I think one of the traps we can fall into as, I don't like to say older, but I'll say more experienced go-to-market professionals, is it's easy for us to look at people earlier on in their career, and there's some cliche biases. Oh, this generation wants so much feedback. Everyone gets a participation trophy. Oh, they all want a pat on the head. I have a different perspective. I have a lot of great friends that are much earlier in their career than I am. And one of the things I've learned is it's not that they need participation trophies or validation. It's they don't want to wait for coaching until the outcome happens. They've been growing up in digital worlds where their teachers were telling them well before the end of the semester they were not on track for an A, whereas I waited for my report card to get mailed home to me, right? And so they've grown up with this expectation that great coaches give them insights and performance while they still have time to actually affect the outcome. And so this eagerness for feedback and data and performance to drive their next step comes from this desire to impact the outcome. So as you look at yourself as a leader, I like to say inspection without coaching is micromanagement. So the minute you want to inspect something and you're structuring a cadence or a dashboard or a signal, are you ready to coach the team on what to do when that signal manifests itself? Are you ready to give meaningful, actionable instructions? So I would inventory what it is you're inspecting. And then I'd ask myself, if this metric was bright red or this metric was bright green, am I ready to give my team meaningful, actionable insight? And if not, get rid of the cadence. We're doing a lot of business with ourselves in terms of people trying to accumulate where they think they are on the journey. And the technology is available today to tell us exactly where we are on the journey much faster so that we can make some of these proactive decisions.
Makes sense. Absolutely. And tell me about kind of, I guess, honing in on how digital you are in terms of your digital transformation. How do you kind of take stock of that piece of it and whether you should be going out and looking for new technology or if you're kind of okay?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of exercises people can do. I think the first place to start as always is with your customer and your buyer, and really start from the moment you engage with your prospect or a repeat customer. What is their experience like? How does that journey travel through your different organizations? And start asking yourself, who's going to engage with these people when? Where are the people on our team going to be working? Are they going to be Salesforce? Are they going to be in a different tool? How many tools are you asking these people to move across during the buyer and customer journey? And I encourage a lot of operators and revenue leaders that the revenue leaders, whether it's the CMO, CRO, or any of the staff and within their teams, is to really resist barking for tools like I need this tool, I need that tool, and really speak in terms of capabilities. I want improved account planning. I want telemetry on our focus accounts and the level of activity. I want to know if we're multi-threading inside of our hyper-focus accounts. Bring your operations teams capabilities you require and let your operations teams fulfill that capability with the best fit technology. For operators, I encourage them to think more like product managers. I think we've really almost let the inmates run the asylum as operators, and so many of the go-to-market tech firms are driving the narrative of what we should be doing: revenue intelligence, revenue optimization. If you're drowning in tool fatigue, if you're overwhelmed, it's not the vendor's fault. It's the partnership of you and your revenue leaders not sitting down and having clear roles and responsibilities that the business asks for capabilities. The operating team fulfills them, and we need to think like product managers, and we should have roadmaps. I even go as far to encourage some of our operators to go hijack your company's roadmap that is used to communicate about your product and start communicating to the field around your operating capabilities with the same form factor. Hey, we are currently doing QBRs once a quarter. We have lead routing that routes within X number of seconds. You have a Y defect rate. We're going to improve that next quarter. And you have a roadmap of the things you're coming to deliver. Don't name your capabilities off of tools. Name them off of things that are meaningful for the field. And then you earn the right to then swap the technology out. I also think it's important to look at things such as your level of investment by role. I was chartered with rationalizing over 150 tools in a CRM that we ended up choosing to implement at a company. And one of the more interesting things we did was we inventoried how much we were spending role. And it's fascinating when you look at the level of investment across the buyer and customer community, how many tools you're actually purchasing. You start asking common sense questions like, how many of these tools could any one person use in a single day? And understanding how to build that technical roadmap to support those capabilities.
Very interesting. Well, let's talk about if there's a kind of skeptical CRO that's listening to this, that is one of the people that's happy with the way that it's been working and not super interested in trying to implement brand new things. What do you say to that person to kind of help coax them along this journey?
Yeah, I think probably one of the more common pushbacks for people looking to embrace technology either falls into one of two categories. One, we never needed this before, or two, I'm not sure my organization can pull this off, right? In terms of, I don't know if we're mature enough or we're ready for this one. So I'm going to address the first one, which is I've never needed this before. I was having a dinner with a CRO in Texas. So of course we were eating steak, and he shared with me, he said, I don't know, right now we're looking for a new CMO. Culturally, I don't know if this modernized instrumentation of everyone's activities and what they're doing and insights into every step of the cycle, I just don't know if culturally we're ready for this yet. And my challenge to him was, I said, hey, as you go out and look for a CMO, if a CMO arrived today and said, hey, I've been doing this marketing thing for a long time. I heard about all this data automation stuff that's taking place in marketing, but I'm really more of an old school marketer. I'm like, that person would not get through the first screening interview at the bar we've now set for marketers. How much longer do sales leaders think they're going to be able to rock up to their next interview and say they've heard about all this data and automation and insights, but they've been doing this a long time and they really don't roll that way? So we chuckled over the steak, said, okay, you got my attention with that one. I said, look, simple questions like, have you designed territories properly? Are all of the accounts that you have in a territory being worked? When marketing hands intent signals to your sales team, are you asking the sales team to manually go in and see whether they did something with it or not? Or do you have definitive proof that action was taken within an SLA? And my experience is great sellers, they want these signals. And if we look at any other profession out there, whether it's sports or finance or doctors, I can't imagine any of these professionals where we could say, hey, doctor, we can provide you real streaming information about the patient's health on the table. And they say, no, I've never needed this before. I'd rather wing it and use the force, right? And so we just have to actually get home enough to know that if you were great without this stuff, you can be even better when you have it. The second part is, Art, we bought a lot of these tools. I know this is happening. I can see it. I can't remember the last tool we rolled out where I think adoption and go-to-market today is somewhere around the 40 to 50% range is considered good, when ops and enablement teams can get about, just under half of their team using something. I think this is a moment for the operations enablement and revenue leaders to really look themselves in the mirror and check themselves on what I call the idea factory or executive ADD, where we can think things up a lot quicker than the delivery teams can actually bring forth. And if you have insecurity or you don't have self-esteem that you can bring some of these modernized practices to bear, I think it's time to look at your budget and ask, when was the last time you invested in your operations and enablement functions? What's your role with the CIO? How clear are the roles and responsibilities around master data management? When you get your budget every year, does it go completely to new sales reps and new sales capacity and new marketing campaigns? And you buy all of these tools or have this hungry appetite, but your ops function and your ops team, which still gets classified as G&A expense in so many companies, is kind of interesting because one could make the argument that a lot of the revenue ops teams, sales ops, marketing ops, et cetera, are actually a sales and marketing expense, because I perceive if you pulled those functions away, most marketers and sellers today would immediately start reaching for the emergency cord to say they can't do their jobs. Yet, as we look at this huge opportunity to modernize our go-to-market teams, who's leading the investment charge during annual planning to say, hey, we're adding X number of sellers, we're adding Z number of new markets, we want all these initiatives. What's the investment level in your data team? And this is probably, we're fortunate to work with over 200 B2B tech enterprise companies. The difference in the investment level in operations and enablement teams is probably the most stark when you line up 10 or 20 companies where someone has a director who's trying to do the best he or she can. They've got a small, mighty team, of a handful of people that is both maintaining all of the solutions you've bought, as well as trying to drive new ones. And then you flip over to a more modernized, aggressive one. I can think of some of our customers on the tip of this new economy. They show up to calls with a fundamentally different talent level. And they're very aware that these operating and enablement teams are intrinsic to how they're going to be successful. And they don't just say it and they don't just make demands, they actually make the investments during their annual planning cycle, and they can articulate why.
Well, tell me more about how they are more successful. I think that's a perfect place to kind of bring this all to a close. When you do see these people on the tip of the spear, I guess, kind of moving forward into digital transformation, what kind of impact do you see on that whole revenue org?
I think the first thing starts off with any of the frankly tiresome cliches across our organizational boundaries are now, like, they're just dead and gone. Marketing is not complaining that sales isn't following with pipe. Sales is not yelling at marketing for more pipe. They're really all in the boat together and really understand that just the language around the company is that we're not going to be successful without the others. We had a customer panel at our revenue kickoff that really brought this home for me. We had a number of executives up on the panel, and of course, our most enthusiastic group, our BDRs and SDRs, were asking, like, hey, how do I get your attention? How do you make decisions? And who do you pay attention to? And the most insightful thing I heard from that panel was two things: relationships with people they know, bringing us back to the importance of people. With all of this technology, how important the people you know are. And number two, the stories that those people they know tell about being your customer. Which brings us to your best pipeline engine is having relationships with people that have positive customer experiences with your company. And when you think about the SaaS model, which we all inherently know, but if you're still rocking out with that on-prem, I can get your PO and never see you again mindset, whether you're in marketing, sales, or services, we are all serving the customer. And our next opportunity will get vetted. Our next dollar of pipeline will get built based off of people we have relationships with, talking to people they have relationships with about how we serve those people as customers. And so bringing that home, when in terms of, where are we today and what do we have to do next? The first thing is you have to think holistically. And this is why I think there's this trend to integrate RevOps is that becomes the voice of keeping an eye on this end-to-end journey. It's like an instinct that people are consolidating their ops and strategy teams to try and drive this transformation. The other thing is, if you are asking your teams to perform repetitive non-value add tasks, whether it's logging information in Salesforce, the CRM was originally, customer relationship management software. It was supposed to be about the relationship with the customer. It's become this like toil. If you lined up 100 sellers, I bet you they would describe their relationship as more burdensome, because everyone in the company is now curious about what those people in the field, whether it's over Zoom or in person, are doing, right? If you're really driving your team to do a lot of data entry, a lot of data aggregation, account planning, like we've spent so much time in terms of talking about the what and ensuring people's compliance to the what, we're not leaving enough time for the why and what to do next, right? And I know we all know an account plan is only as good as the follow-ups. We all know that a lead is only as good as the follow-up, but the amount of effort we're actually putting into the process or the documentation or the compliance with filling out fields, it's robbing us of the energy to actually perform our task. One of my favorite sayings, even though I struggle with it, is I would have written a shorter letter if I'd only had the time. And I encourage operators to remember that we like to make a lot of jokes at the expense of sellers in terms of their eagerness, aptitude, or whatever it is for details. And I think it's a really unfair condemnation, because Great sellers don't come to work wondering what your company's doing. Great sellers come to work wondering what their customers and competitors are doing, right? They're focused outward. And what they do is they just check in with the company for a couple hours a week. So if we want them to do something, if we want them to work as a team, it's on us as senior leaders, it's on us as operators to write that shorter letter, make what we're asking them to do impactful for them and their customers, or guess what? They're not going to do it. So if you're asking your team to do things, if you're having dashboards created, if you're putting process in place, do you have a sales methodology? And if you do, how have you operationalized that? Is it really burdensome for the sellers, or is it giving them something back? So I think we need to get the people who serve our customers, who are out there hunting for us, who are out there building relationships, getting curious about our customers' business models. We got to get them out of the business of doing business with the company they work for. And we need to start giving something back to them that helps them do their job better. So I would inventory everything from your sales methodology to your sales stages to your operating cadence. Go wipe out 10 or 20 dashboards. If you want to be the hero of your operations teams, sit down and tell them the 10 dashboards you asked to have created that you haven't used in a year. Start to really say, how good are your one-on-ones, your frontline managers? And in terms of a macro call to action here, I would wrap up with, if you don't have a frontline manager program in place today with clear documented competencies, and you haven't mapped what those competencies for your frontline managers are to the tooling and the data and the insights you have available as a company, how are they going to figure it out? You're taking some of your top sellers, you're putting them in a new leadership responsibility. There's no roadmap for what success looks like, and there's no clear path to how to use the assets and tools that you've supposedly invested for their benefit. So I'm always a little bit shocked as I go around and talk to people, and it's another area of dichotomy where someone will have a frontline manager program, it is reinforced, it's enablement, it's enabled, and they can execute through that. Others, I got some mumbling, we're working on it, and I'm like, wow. Think about your largest investment in go-to-market are these frontline sales leaders. That's where your strategy is translating into execution. And how clear have we been in terms of what their job is and how we support them doing it?
Yeah, great points. And so much more to think about. We could talk about this forever. It's tough to kind of, unpack all of the things that go into this. But I think, we've touched on some incredible points here, ranging across, starting off with why sales is kind of lagging behind in this digital transformation and kind of how to realign that transformation with the customer rather than just buying tech for the sake of buying tech. So perfect place to wrap up, Art. If people want to learn more from you, if they want to get in touch with you, where can they do that?
Sure, a couple places. I try to be active on LinkedIn, so I'm always eager to hear from folks who have a shared passion and interest for the changes in go-to-market. Also, my email, art@people.ai, or feel free to check out our website and reach out to us there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Art, on the Predictable Revenue Podcast. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you, sir. Bye.
And thank you to all of you for showing up for another episode. Great having you again. As always, if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button on YouTube so that you can be notified each week when we have wonderful guests like Art Harding joining us on the Predictable Revenue Podcast. We'll catch you next time.